The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from A Veiled Gazelle by Idries Shah. The Inward Observer. Rober the fox really admired himself, and was convinced that all his opinions were true facts. Opinions, after all, were what lesser beings had, not Rober. One day, as he was thinking this, some chickens came pecking their way along the road. As soon as they saw him, they fled, fluttering and clucking for all they were worth. Rober ran after them, and when they were winded and cowering, he asked them what they were doing. "We are running away because we are frightened of you. You might eat us." "It is only your opinion. I am sure that it is a fact that I have no aggression in me, and that I would not eat you," answered Rober. "But in order to teach you, rather than to test myself, let us demonstrate. You chickens just try your best to incense me." So the chickens, their curiosity aroused, pecked at him and scuffed up stones at him, while they laughed louder and louder as he did not react at all. Suddenly the fox snarled, and as the fowls streaked away in alarm, he shouted, "Now I know why foxes chase chickens. If they did not, and everyone behaved like you, fox life would be intolerable. It only appears to the outward observer that a fox always makes the first aggressive move." Latif and the Miser's Gold. There was once a miser who was so extremely mean that when he had to go away for a time and wanted someone to watch his bags of gold, he could not find anyone to do it except a woman who was so stupid that she believed him when he said he would pay her for the sacrifice. Latif the thief heard something about this. He walked straight into the miser's house and picked up the bags of gold. The woman was sitting there watching the gold, and when she saw him, she said, "Who do you think you are, taking that gold away?" Latif said, "I am Latif the thief, if it's any business of yours." The woman said, "I may be stupid, but you are the stupidest man I ever heard of. Not only do you walk in here in broad daylight and pick up the miser's entire fortune, but you even tell me your name." Latif had worked it all out in advance. He said, "You wouldn't give Latif the thief away, would you, just because he took a little gold?" The woman said, "You can't get round me like that, you know. I know my duty, and I'll testify in court against you." "Madam, you do just that," said Latif, "and to repay evil with good, I'll tell you how to avoid going blind." She said, "What do you mean, go blind?" "Don't you see the blinding rain outside?" asked Latif. "Well, if you don't hold your hands over your eyes and count to 30, you'll go blind. You have heard the phrase blinding rain, haven't you? Now we have that phrase because of the real, original blinding rain, which doesn't often fall. I'm an expert, and I can tell you that this is the real, the original blinding rain that is falling now. It doesn't often happen, but as a thief I'm out in all weathers and have to know about things like that." The stupid woman said, "Thank you indeed. I'm grateful to you, don't think I am not, but duty is duty, and I shall have to report what happened and who did it." She covered her eyes with her hands, though, and counted to 30 as Latif bore the gold away. When the miser came home, he was furious, both that the gold was gone, and because Latif had walked in and taken it in broad daylight. He called the police, and they soon tracked down and arrested Latif the thief, who had meanwhile very carefully concealed the gold so that it was not to be found. Latif was taken to court, and the woman testified, and when it was his turn to speak, he said to the judge, Your Honour, in the first place, this woman says that I went into the house and told her my name and stole the gold. Now, what self-respecting thief would do that? Secondly, I would like to ask her a question. The judge said, Very well, ask her. Latif said, Madam, when was it that I stole the gold? And she said, Well, don't you remember? It was the evening of the blinding rain. Latif said, Would you mind telling the court what the blinding rain is, because they might not know? Certainly, said the woman. It is the rain that our blinding rain is named after. It is the rain that actually does make you blind, and unless you hold your hands over your eyes and count to 30, you will be struck blind. Latif said to the judge, Your Honour, as I have just shown, this is hardly a reliable witness. I submit that she never saw me steal anything more than she ever endured any blinding rain. And he won the case. Now, everyone has heard of the people who say that because a person is unreliable in one thing, he must be unreliable in everything. Well, believe it or not, this is the original case on which this very logical idea is based. Latif the thief thus takes his place in history as a person who has contributed something to human civilization. He taught us that if a person says one thing unreliable, then everything which he does is likely to be unreliable. And we all know that that's true, don't we? Of course, nowadays in real life, the general level of cultural anticipation of events has improved. Nobody entrusts responsibility to people too stupid to discharge it properly, any more than they teach people things which they are not yet ready to understand. But the case of the gold? I am afraid that through some lack of coordination of facts, it is still on the files as unsolved. When dishonest is honest. Alim, an old friend, went one day with Latif on a journey. They travelled fast, and after several days they arrived at a village where Latif was received with great respect by the people. "People are waiting for you, Latif Baba," they said. Latif and Alim were taken to a house where Latif at once sat down and started to see the large number of people who had been waiting, some for months, until he arrived. He saw them one by one. Alim watched while Latif listened to what each person wanted. Some of them needed money, others work, others were artists, some were people who wanted to promote some kind of new idea. Some were looking for special doctors who could treat difficult cases. To each and every one of them, Latif gave a letter addressed to some prince, noble, specialist, artisan, king or merchant, or to an official, or the mayor of a town, or to a mullah, or to some other person, important or otherwise. When Latif had seen all the people, over a week had passed. Then the villagers came and said, "Great Latif Baba, the gifts await you." Latif and Alim were taken to a warehouse which was full of every kind of commodity. There were silks and satins, robes of honor, bags of gold, sacks of rare and interesting items. There were plates of gold and hand-worked scarves, curiosities and foodstuffs, dried fruits and jewels, sweetmeats and arms, bowls of cut crystal, almost everything one could imagine, large and small, valuable and insignificant. Latif called upon the people who were waiting for the warehouse to be opened and asked them their business one by one. As each person left, Latif assigned him a gift from the warehouse until nothing was left. This all took up a further week. When that was finished, Latif said to Alim, "Come, we shall return to our other life." When they were on the road again, Alim said to Latif, "Good Latif, what was the meaning of what we have been through during the past fortnight? For I cannot understand it, however much I try." Latif laughed. "How could you understand something, and why should you try, if you do not know what went before?" Alim asked Latif to tell why and how he came to be in the position of a Baba, a sort of saint. Latif said, "Many years ago, when I was a disciple of a great man, he ordered me to travel to every country in the world. While I was there, I was to familiarize myself with the customs and problems and the people of importance and their needs and the peculiarities of each region. This exercise occupied me for 7 years. When it was over, I was able to make use of the vast store of knowledge which I had accumulated. Let me illustrate. Take the man who had invented a new kind of chair for people with one leg. Now, during my travels, I was in the land of the one-legged people. Hardly anyone else knows about it, but they are the people to buy the chair and to make that inventor happy and rich until the end of his days. So all I had to do was to tell him how to get there. And the same with the people who wanted donkeys or healing, or who needed education, or who realized that they were in the wrong position. Like a guide at a crossroads, I was able to point out the way." "And what was the meaning of the things in the warehouse?" asked Alim. "Quite simple. When people gained what they wanted in following my instructions, they naturally sent me something to give out to the less fortunate, and that was what I was doing during the 2nd week of our stay at the village." Alim was amazed, for he realized that he knew hardly anything about the extraordinary Latif, while he had imagined that he knew all about him. "But why not settle down and become a holy man, a Baba?" he said. "In that way you would not have to be a thief." "Do I really have to remind you again," said Latif, "that I am a thief because the ordinary men of the world consider themselves to be honest, and not because they are honest or I am dishonest. A dishonest Baba, claiming respect because he knows where to get things or where to send people, is more of a thief than the man who takes what has been stolen in the first place and restores it to its rightful owner." Unbalanced. Nasruddin was a master of the answer which corresponds to the mentality or the intentions of the speaker. Once, someone taking him for an idiot asked, "Why do some people walk in one direction and others in the opposite direction?" Nasruddin at once said, "Well, if they all walked on the same part of the earth, it would become overweighted and turn upside down." True story. An English seeker after truth once sold everything he had and wandered to the East, where he spent all his time looking for a suitable Sufi teacher, convinced that this was what he must do. After 8 years of this life, he came upon a dervish and asked him if he knew the way to arrive at the door of the teacher of the age. "Certainly," said the dervish. He immediately wrote down a name and address. The Englishman was naturally most impressed and grateful, and for a moment he could hardly believe that his quest was almost ended. Then he looked at the paper and said, "But this is someone who lives in London, and his house is not 5 minutes' walk from my old home." "Exactly," said the dervish, "and that is not all. If you had stayed where you were and made reasonable enquiries instead of arrogant and flamboyant gestures like wandering over the earth without permission, you would have met him 6 years ago." The murder. One day, over 1,000 years ago, a number of building labourers were carrying sacks up ladders during the construction of a house. One of them seemed to be in an unusually good humour. Nobody would have imagined that there was anything especially undesirable about him. But the Abbasi Caliph al-Mu'tadid, looking at the scene from his window, became curious about this labourer. He had inquiries made as to whether the man was drunk or mad, or whether there was any special reason for his elation. When it was reported to the Caliph that nothing unusual was known about the man, he was immediately called to the imperial presence. The Caliph ordered him to be beaten and asked how much money he had. After a short time, the labourer admitted that he possessed 1,000 gold pieces. When he was further asked how he got it, he confessed. "In the evenings I work as a stoker at a Turkish bath," he said, "and recently a man ran in and asked me to look after him. He had been drinking. I covered him with some rubbish in a corner. Soon afterwards some other drunks ran in after him, but I told them that he was not there and they left. When I went back to him, he had lost consciousness. I searched him and found 1,000 gold pieces on him. I stole this money and disposed of the man by burning him in the furnace." The Caliph had an investigation made, and it was discovered that the man was a foreigner. The Caliph had the money given to trustees to be transmitted to the murdered man's family. In accordance with custom, the stoker was himself burnt in a furnace for his crime. This was one of the occasions when caliphal perception caused an example which prevented people from committing crimes for years on end. Potential criminals were terrified that they might be discovered by some sort of supernatural prescience which their ruler seemed to have. When he was asked by a few intimates as to how he had arrived at the conclusion that something was amiss with the murderer, al-Mu'tadid said, "This man's behaviour did not accord with his temperament, his work, or his condition. Knowing the type, I realized that in some way he had become possessed of money." This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.